Were dinosaurs created before man? And if so, how is that explained in the Bible?
Go for it, my man.
This gets us immediately into the question of how to interpret Genesis chapter 1 of the Bible. And a lot of ink, if not blood, has been spilled on this one. In the book Greg and I did, Across the Spectrum, we talk about the four views on this topic through church history. Broadly speaking, it all comes down to the question, what do you do with the 7 days of creation, right? So a very common view amongst a lot of biblical-oriented Christians today is called the young earth view, that takes the 7 days as literal 24-hour periods of time, in which case, if that's true, then all you have to do is add up roughly the genealogies in chapter 10 and chapter 5 of Genesis, add 7 days on, and we can come within a relatively narrow window of time of when the earth must have been created. And usually the number given is, well, it can't be any older than 10,000 years, given those genealogies, even granting skips in those genealogies. And that, of course, if it's 10,000 years old, poses real problems for quote-unquote dinosaur bones that we find, and that other, for geological reasons, say want to date well past 10,000 years. But there's at least three other really plausible, good arguments by godly people have been made for different ways of reading those 7 days. One is the day-age theory that says those aren't 7 periods of 24 hours, but rather 7 indistinct periods of time that could be, for all we know, millions of years. They say that because the word yom, or day, in Hebrew has the same versatility as it does in English. So I could say to you, today I'm going to the store, in which you'd naturally translate that within this 24-hour period. But if I said to you, in the day of the dinosaur, you wouldn't think that dinosaurs only live for 24 hours. You'd say, no, that's a period of time. Same way you can use the term in Hebrew. And so possibly, some have said, it's long periods of time, and so there'd be plenty of time for dinosaurs to come, and then creations of humans, that sort of thing. Greg holds to a different view called the restoration view.
The true view, sometimes known as.
The truly confused view. It's also known as the gap view, which, if you trace the history of that, is for the gap of empty space between the ears of people who hold that view. But we're not going to go into that.
Ching.
And then there's the true view, which is the framework, literary framework view.
The liberal view.
The highly biblical view. The view that I'm sure Jesus believed in. He just never wrote on the topic. So a lot of different, how you answer this dinosaur question is going to depend first on how you come at Genesis 1 and what you're doing there. So you want to say anything more?
And that here is just important to, I think, remember that original thing that we gave early on, the difference between dogma, doctrine, and opinion, and to realize this is a difference of interpretation on a particular passage of Scripture, and we've got to be okay with that, and not to leverage the whole faith on this. My only concern about this issue, the issue that I've had to wrestle with, that I think is important, is the problem of evil. Once you grant, as I do, that the earth is 4.5 billion years old, because it's very clear that there's been death and destruction before Adam, and so I've done a lot of work on that. That, to me, is the important issue. But the whole issue of how old the earth is in particular, and how to interpret Yom, whatever, that can be interesting, but I get concerned when people with more of a house of cards theology make that one of the cards. And this is something we got to take a stand on and leverage the Christian faith on. And more often than not, it's the young earth creationists who are very passionate that we hold to a literal interpretation of Genesis 1. And if you let go of that, well, then the Bible's the book of lies, or the Christian faith comes crumbling down, or people are going to turn into atheists or whatever. They really are convinced of that. And the trouble with that is that whenever the church has leveraged, to hold that view is to, among other things, you have to declare war on the vast majority of the scientists who deal with paleontology and geology and all the other sciences that are predicated on evolutionary theory. And if that really is the center of the faith, then we have to do that. But if it's not, all other things being equal, it makes more sense to allow that to have some variety of interpretation, so we don't require a person to reject 98% of the scientists who are out there in order to become a Christian. I just don't like putting unnecessary obstacles to people coming to faith. And so that's one of the negotiable, things that people can talk about and dialogue about. Since we don't get our life from it, we can be flexible and talk rationally about it. But I don't think that we should ever make too much hang on that. And historically, whenever the church has done that, we've lost. The church lost incredible credibility in the broader culture when it declared war on the heliocentric theory of the solar system and insisted that the earth was the center. We ended up losing that debate, and then the credibility of the gospel we're preaching went down. So I just don't think the credibility of the faith should hang upon particular scientific theories or particular interpretations of particular passages that are not central to what the church is about.
I just want to adjust your last really well-said statement by one word, because at one point you said on the evolutionary, and I think it's important to keep two separate questions separate. One is, how old is the creation? That has 4 different views in Genesis 1. We just went through that. A very different question, not unrelated but different, is what about the creation-evolution controversy? Because it could very well be the case that God had decided to create a very old earth, but decided not to use evolution as any part of the mechanism by which species proliferate. It's that I think, in fact, what I think where a lot of the heat for young earth creation theorists is they're so dead set against godless evolution, and sort of the Darwinian sort of thing, and they assume that as soon as you say old earth, that means you've just bought the whole evolutionary package. It's like, why assume that? There's a lot of ways God could have done this thing. And one way that's possible and conceivable is an old earth, but a very recent creation for humanity. That's a very compatible, plausible scenario. So I don't want to go and fight the entire scientific establishment on the age of the earth because of a sub-debate I might have on them about the nature of evolution. There's really, really 2 different questions.
Yeah, what is central to the whole biblical storyline is that we are not the products of time and chance. We're made in the image of God, and we have a divine purpose. And so whether you hold that God used evolution or not, one of the non-negotiables, I think, is that this wasn't just a chance sort of thing. So it's important, as you just said, not to equate evolution itself with atheistic evolution, but to realize that you can have a divine mechanism behind that. And it could be the case, even possibly, that the whole process didn't involve not only God's influence, but what if there was demonic influence as well? That might explain the problem of evil before human beings, but that's an entirely different issue. I just wrote a paper on that, and that's why it's in my head. Sorry.